Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Juneteenth. So appropriate to be unveiling new revelations for the Rosenwald Fund. Like our moderator said, I did do my research. I am a librarian and an archivist. So naturally, getting my doctorate in information science, I just automatically ventured into the records. I initially discovered the Julius Rosenwald Fund Library program while on an IMLS fellowship at Fisk University in 2011. Had a prospectus written out and everything, and I'm processing the S.L. Smith collection, who is another unsung hero of the Rosenwald program, and I come across the library program, and I'm like, wait, if I don't know about this, other people can't. So I scrapped everything I had written and picked this up. And I've been running with it ever since, and it's been very rewarding. So I'm going to give you a little background on American public library history so you can understand the disparities for African American public library history and library history in general for blacks. So the earliest books were owned by clergy and wealthy people because to have a library meant that you had money. Books were so rare in America in the 1700s. So Benjamin Franklin and the Juto starts around 1731. But the first public funded, meaning locally supported by local tax, didn't happen until 1854 with the Boston Public Library. That gives you a little overall background. Now, library development for African Americans in the North started in 1828 in Philadelphia, which, of course, we all know is a very progressive American city in many aspects. And then, of course, Baltimore, Maryland, another progressive American city, follows suit. However, for blacks, you don't see, there is no record of service to African Americans in the library pre-1900. Not one. You cannot find it. Not at the Library of Congress, not at the National Archives, and if they don't have it, it doesn't exist. This starts with the Charlotte Public Library for colored people, and then you see the other southern libraries begin in Tennessee, Texas, Kentucky. Very progressive. However, the services was so terrible. The book collections were so terrible because many of the collections came from churches that were closing in the North, some of the schools. So you had collections full of theology at the college and at the public library. They really could not use these books. So what really helps the development of libraries in the South is philanthropy. And Rosenwald is hands down one of the most unsung people for philanthropy in the public library. That really sparks the library development in the South. So Rosenwald, we know the schools start, right? Well, he visits many of the schools, and so do the superintendents, the fund officials, and they say, the libraries are terrible. And he deems that, well, the school is useless without a proper library. This is the whole point, education. And without proper library or reading materials, the students are not being, the purpose is not being fulfilled, was his thought. So he teams up with the ALA, who says to him, well, don't sink a lot of money into it if you're not going to have the trained professionals, which makes sense. But then this debate ensues of the chicken or the egg. Does the library come first or does the librarian? So Hampton Institute is created. It's established for the training of Negro librarians. And at the same time, he starts to produce book sets, as we know them as the libraries that were in the Rosenwald schools. So when you see libraries and book sets, it's interchangeable throughout the records because the libraries are actually 5 to 6 different types of book sets on various topics dealing with American history, sociology, just various topics for the Rosenwald schools. So we know the Rosenwald programs covers 4 areas: education, health and medical services, fellowships, scholarships, and race relations. I've been trying to find someone who's getting their doctorate in health to really dig into the health. Being at Fisk University and having complete access to this collection was a gift and a curse, because I helped so many researchers, including Ms. Grimes and Dr. Hoshwally, and I'm just like, you should look into this. Well, you should look into this. It becomes a curse because you have all these records that haven't been explored. And the health program, set aside, is a phenomenal program that has not been explored. So if you know someone, tell them to go to Fisk and dig in that part of the collection. I myself unveiled the library portion. So my research question that centers around my dissertation is, well, basically, how does the Rosenwald Fund influence other philanthropists and other organizations to help develop library services to African Americans? Because that was the mission of the library program, was to not have to do this on his own as he had to do with the schools and the communities. He did not want to bear this cross. He wanted other people to see why this was important. So in my research, what I discovered was the program starts in 1927 simultaneously with the health program. This is when, of course, Embry takes over and the organization is revamped. The whole gist of it was to improve literacy, which improves educational opportunities. And he does this. He does this in a massive way that I myself didn't expect. Because when I went into the research, I was looking at the libraries in the rural schools. Well, it turns out that not only was it the rural schools that he supplied over 9,000 libraries to, and library sets, we also have a significant portion of HBCUs, African American colleges and normal schools, many of them still standing today. Many of those library buildings still standing today, such as Fisk University's Cravath Memorial Library was the original library on the campus, the second library on the campus, and Rosenwald contributed $100,000 to it. We're talking about 1930 here. So $100,000 in 1930. Also, the high schools and the county public libraries. This program is really a significant reason why we have public libraries in the South today, and people don't know it. It's also a big reason why we have integrated public libraries in the 1920s, and people don't know it. So with the rural schools, it starts off as an experiment like everything with Rosenwald. He's a very safe man. He's very wanting to give and help, but he's very safe and with his planning and money. He's not the type of person just to throw money at it. He has to see if it works first. And if the purpose behind it is fulfilled on an experimental level, then it will be on a mass level. The key thing is educating the principals and the teachers who did not have access to libraries during their teacher training because they were at normal schools, or they got out of college or high school at the time at the age of 15 and became teachers. But they didn't have access to children's literature. They didn't have access to any type of textbooks. They had access to some clergy books, but they're not clergy. So it started at the top level of educating the principals and the teachers on this is why this is important. This is how you care for books. This is how you produce information services. How they had to read every book that was in the set. And the initial sets consisted anywhere from 50 to 150 books. And they had to read each one of those books so they are better able to help the students. And this really excites them because, again, just like the students, they didn't have access to these things. The books was free access and use. Now, when we say free access and use, we have to remember that the school was also a community organization. So the students who parents owned farms, remember they couldn't go to school year round because when the crop came in, they had to be on the farm to help their family. So the free access goes beyond the student. If the student has people at home, they want to come and use the book, the library was open to the community. We have to remember that the schools it wasn't just elementary school or high school. It was a community school where you had multiple age groups in one room. So that's why it was mainly free access and use of books, because whether you were in school or not, you were able to use these books. It was all about improving literacy. So the books, it was consistently new books. So the students weren't just reading the same books over and over. And this is a practice that they called reading encouragement, the fund. Well, I dub it as reading encouragement, but the consistent addition of new books, collection development, as we know it in LIS. The service provided to the community residents and annual reports. There's a new level of accountability that we have not seen in libraries from philanthropic organizations. So you'll have the officials coming around and asking students questions. Smith, we'll visit these libraries and, well, how many books have you read? Or tell me your favorite story. There's an accountability to not the students, but the teachers and the principals to make sure they're doing their job with what they've been supplied. Now, the African American college libraries was deemed the most successful division of the library program. Why? Well, like I said, they're normal schools, teacher colleges, but they had maybe a room, maybe from this wall to the table for a library, and lacked books. So the teachers going out into the field were insufficient, for lack of a better. They were insufficient as educators. They did not have access to children's literature or a good supply of books for their own studies. So the colleges, they take reading encouragement to a whole new level, because we're talking about at least 1,000 books in each college. There is a list of all of the colleges, and of course, everyone had to match a certain level of funding. If Rosenwald gave $1, you were to give $2. So it was very involved, not just the college, but the community as well, because again, we know just how the schools were servicing the community, so did these libraries. The book list. There's a very influential woman from Hampton by the name of Florence Curtis. If you haven't heard of her, significant librarian in education. So she's over Hampton Institute, and she produces this book list so long and with so much detail of every single subject that they could possibly be interested in. But racism creeps in naturally. It's the 1920s. Racism creeps in the form of the University of Chicago, elite school, wonderful history. Well, their professors say, well, this book list is much too advanced for the Negro. There's no way possible they are reading at this level in the South, let alone the Negro South. And I would say Jackson Davis of GEB and Smith were more than offended, to which they wrote her back a very nice, nasty letter, as I call it, of defending the African American literacy level at the college level, because they felt that the book list was on the level of University of Chicago, and there was no way the Negroes are reading at the white level. This is what the letter said, the white level. They defended her, and because they wanted to take over the library program, they wanted to mold it in their own vision, and the fund, thankfully, did not let them do that, because Florence Curtis, Miss Curtis, was with them from the beginning of the library program. And she made significant ventures with the significant improvements with the college libraries. So they stood by her side, and they praised her for her attributes. Again, accountability. Annual reports every 5 years. these annual reports were so detailed, and just, well, how are the students using the books? What reports are they writing? And then you got additional notes about what the community was doing. And then you see the enrollment constantly improve. Then you see that, because funding, all Rosenwald's funding is only for so long, or for the establishment or something. So you see that they are making plans post-funding. They're preparing for the funding to be cut off. They're preparing for a consistency in the growth of their students. And all of a sudden, they have a pot of money to consistently build their own collections. The encouragement and the growth, the continuous growth post-Rosenwald Library Fund is phenomenal. And like I said, many of these colleges are still standing today, and they have no idea. They have no idea what the Rosenwald Fund did for them. I discovered it at Fisk University and informed them. And it's sitting in their records. They have no idea. Many of these schools, especially, I'm from Florida, many of them in Florida, FAMU, Bethune, public and private, mind you. Public and private HBCUs receive this funding and they're still standing. But they don't know that building that's sitting on their campus was not only Carnegie funded, but it was Rosenwald funded. That's another thing you see is people always want to put Carnegie and Rosenwald Library Fund against each other. Well, the difference is, and I'll get into that with the county libraries, but they actually cooperated a lot together and made a lot of this happen for not only the rural schools, but also the HBCUs. Yes?
Can I just ask a quick question right now? Did Rosenwald fund only the books, or did he also fund the building of a library?
The building, the books, salary.
Okay.
I mean, the whole nine. It's really significant fund, which is different for Carnegie. Like I said, they had different objectives. Well, they had different things they would fund, but the same goal of literacy. Yes, sir.
Real quick, as long as you're on money, did he also attach the same sort of matching requirements?
Yes.
And the result, was it primarily among the African American community or the white community also?
I would say, well, depends on what division of libraries you're talking about, rural schools, high schools, colleges, or community. Because, of course, for the HBCUs, and this was, when he funded colleges, he only funded HBCUs because they were so despair. The libraries were just little to none. So the colleges, blacks. Everyone else was community-wide, and I'll show you how he did that. It's actually pretty phenomenal and the first in philanthropic history for libraries, which is why it's disheartening for me that no one knows about this. So the high school libraries, whole new level. What he does with the high school libraries, the titles go from 1,000 at the college to 2,000 different titles and 15 periodicals, but they really focus in on the library facility. Today, we make the library facility feel like home. We make students comfortable so they can be there for hours and study. And we think it's something new with the whole library commons, but this was the idea for the high school in 1928, 1929. Where they deemed, there was this quote, and I now use it as my signature, the library is the soul of the schoolhouse. And that's how we feel today, but it really started back in 1929. Another thing he does with the high school libraries is that he uses it to get the schools accredited, because they had not been, none of them, African American schools pre this time had not been accredited by the Department of Education. But because of the design, the level, and the stipulations he put on the funding, they were able to get state accreditation. Something else nobody knows about. Now, the county library demonstration, 7 states, 11 counties. He sinks $500,000, $500,000 in 1929. Sinks $500,000. Carnegie comes on, sinks in another $200,000 to extend it to 7 years. This focuses on community literacy. Now, here's the thing that I spoke about with what he did with the money and what's so significant. You could not get this money if you were not going to offer service to all, rural, urban, black and white. So ultimately, You had to desegregate to get this money and to have this service to the community. So we had this issue, we've always had this whole issue of separate but equal, and it doesn't end until Brown versus Board of Education. But Rosenwald was already doing this. He knew separate but equal was not realistic in the time, especially in the South, where, the South is the black history in the South and the black history in the North is slightly different when it comes to race relations, just slightly. But he does this to prevent the county administrators from excluding black people, because he saw this happening in other philanthropic distributions, where they would say, well, everyone has to use this. But he actually made it a stipulation upon funding. You cannot get this money. And they made frequent visits and checkups. Even if there was a segregated room for blacks in that library, they had to be able to come in that library and use whatever facilities and check out the same level of books as the whites in the community. So he put that on a stipulation. Also, it was educational, recreational, and cultural. The library, the public library, or he calls them county library, the public library was very... there was classes held, there was social events held, there was clubs that did things there. There was all types of training. And it had regular library services, and they were also held accountable to each other, because they create this quarterly report, and each library, the librarian, has to report what they are doing with this money and with this funding. The books got down to the point where how many books were for blacks and how many books were for whites. And there was some disparities where the funding was being used more so for whites and blacks. And Rosenwald did things, the fund did things to counteract that. The geography, the library was they chose the South simply because of disparities. In the time period, 1927, it closes in 1947, pre to the fund, because we all know the fund closes basically due to economic depression. So the Southern Library practices, he comes with a combination of approaches where it's a cooperative effort. He's really just trying to stimulate others to do the same, because there's a stipulation where all the money had to be spent 25 years post-death. He put that in his stipulations, his will. He wanted all the money of the Julius Rosenwald Fund to be spent within 25 years, and the fund was to end. It happened before 25 years simply because of the Depression. And I do want you to know that my research, I spent months, and it revealed so much money that the Rosenwald program, not only into the libraries, but state library commissions, because some of the states didn't have them, library schools such as Atlanta, Hampton, Fisk University had a library school, FAMU. There was a significant number of HBCUs with library science schools. Training institutes, he created libraries for military service, and as well as big cities like New York, Richmond, Atlanta, who did not. In conclusion, it worked. It simply worked. The stimulation of book service encouraged other philanthropists, organizations, and I say philanthropists, big organizations and small, to help develop libraries in various forms. The biggest thing was reading encouragement. There is this concept that Negro children did not read because their parents could not or did not. But that misconception was only another conception based off, well, black progression had to be held back from white progression. That was the concept. And reading encouragement, Rosenwald comes in, it's not a matter of they can't read, they didn't have supplies, they didn't have books. And the books was the reading encouragement that he implemented on all levels of this program. Also, the impact on race relations that nobody's dove into. He desegregated libraries for funding, and many of them complied without issue, without cause. Of course, there was, racial tensions and things like that, but they did it because they didn't have anything. They didn't have a library for whites, let alone blacks. so rural of a region. So they desegregated just to get something. It's funny how funding will bring people together and get them off their high horse. But it basically improved the literacy and education opportunities, not only for blacks, which is what I was looking at in my research, but for the entire American South. Everyone was helped from this program, all ages, all groups of people. It's a very detailed research program, and I hope that more people get into it. So thank you.